Welcome to A State of Mind, the podcast that brings together consciousness, meditation, mindfulness, psychology, psychedelics, and so much more in pursuit of this mystery we call life. This is Julian Royce. Thank you for tuning in. I'm excited about today's episode. It is another one that deals with politics, but not maybe in the way you're thinking. It's not about a certain party or candidate, or it's not a partisan thing. It's more about the way we vote altogether. And I reached out to an organization that is working to bring us a better way of voting. That way of voting is called ranked choice voting. I mean, this organization didn't create it, but they're working here in Colorado to have us be able to choose local elections in this way. And so today I'm speaking with Matt Benjamin. And Matt is someone who got involved with politics at the local level here in Boulder, Colorado. He ran for city council, and he shares his story with us. But basically, he ran a good campaign. He was passionate about it. He had good intentions. He didn't win. But what was more difficult for him than not winning was realizing that just by running and getting a decent amount of votes, he actually helped elect the person he least liked to the position he was running for, because he took votes away from the other candidate that he was closer to in terms of positions and policy. And so he realized how problematic our whole voting system is. And ranked choice voting is a little bit, it takes a little bit of time to explain, but if you listen to our conversation, you will understand it. You will be able to explain it to others. And I think you'll see how much better of a system it is. To try to put it in, to try to say what it is right here at the beginning, it's basically like, instead of just voting for one person for a position, you could rank your choices. Like, say there were 10 people running for a position. Instead of just voting for one of them, you could rank your first choice, your second choice, and your third choice. If your first choice does not win that office, your vote is not wasted. Your vote then goes to who you chose for number 2. And if that number 2 choice, again, doesn't do that well, doesn't win, your vote then goes to your third party choice. What that does is it allows you to vote for the person you really want to vote for and not have your vote be wasted. So our current system has kind of reached its logical conclusion, I think. I think we're all ready for a change, but it's led to this system of having to choose the worst, the lesser of two evils. Or some people are out there, like, their vote is a protest vote. They don't really like the person they're voting for, but they're just going to vote for them to kind of say F you to the system. And then a lot of people don't participate at all because they don't like the choices that they're given. So I think ranked choice voting is a great idea. It's something that I learned about many years ago, and it's been a long time coming. And it's used with success in places like Europe and Australia, and it's used in a lot of local elections across the country. So this is going to be the last episode directly on politics, at least for the next couple weeks, most likely. And we'll get back to more of the kinds of conversations that we're used to having here on the podcast. I have another psychedelic assisted therapist coming on next Monday, so I'm excited about that. That will be Daniel McQueen with Medicinal Mindfulness. And just one quick tangent here. Part of how I got so interested in this ranked choice voting system was the first time I ever got to vote was in the 2000 election. And I proudly cast my vote at that time for the Green Party. And, interestingly, I was researching this for this podcast episode, and it turns out HBO is releasing a documentary on the 2000 election today. October, 21st. So that was a synchronicity or coincidence, depending on how you look at it. But, this election in 2000, Gore won the popular vote, but Bush won through the Electoral College, through the Supreme Court interfering. Ralph Nader and the Green Party got, 2.8 million votes in that election. So clearly, if we'd had a ranked choice voting system, and maybe the Green Party, maybe other parties would have gotten more votes, but more people would have then had their vote counted, and it wouldn't have had this spoiler effect where people blame the Green Party for Gore losing. The Green Party got 97,000 votes in Florida, for example, and it was declared that Bush won that state by 535 votes. And there's obviously a lot that we could say about this, but basically the Supreme Court came in and decided the election. The Supreme Court voted completely along partisan lines. If you look at our Constitution, the Supreme Court is explicitly designed to be a nonpartisan branch of the government, to check and balance the other branches of the government. They are supposed to interpret the law not based on their personal biases or their personal beliefs or their party affiliations. And so this, was such a corrupt decision. I think it has had a longer lasting impact than maybe many of us realize, because we just want to forget about it and move on. Let's see. And then I recently learned if we had gone back and recounted all the votes in the state of Florida, Gore almost certainly would have won that state. And there were other shenanigans, like at that time in Florida, it was illegal for convicted felons to vote even after they'd been released from jail. And they used a list of names created by some kind of independent corporation of all the felons living in Florida. And then anyone whose name matched name on that list, their vote was not counted. Now, a lot of people happen to have the same name as someone who convicted a felony, and those people's votes weren't counted. So there were all kinds of things like that going on. It was not a good situation. And so part of why I bring this up, why it still rankles me when I think about it, things like the Iraq War that Bush led us into, such a waste of lives and money, and the environment, something like climate change. Like Al Gore was the most pro-environmental candidate perhaps to ever run for president. And I believe, looking back 20 years ago, there's a lot we could have done over the last 20 years to help mitigate something like climate change. And just the way in which our system has become so polarized, how the two-party system has become so dysfunctional over the last 20 years. I really do think it is time for a change, and that is why I wanted to have this episode on ranked choice voting. So that's my tangent, that's my spiel. And without further ado, I bring you Matt Benjamin. And I'm here today with Matt Benjamin. Matt, thanks for being on the podcast.
Appreciate it, Julian. It's a pleasure to be on this podcast, and I look forward to a great conversation.
Yeah, and you were just telling me that you ran for city council in Boulder in 2017, and you're going to share a little bit about that. And like the bigger thing that is bringing us together is this idea of ranked choice voting and having a new, improved way that we vote. So I'll just say that. And do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
My name is Matt Benjamin. I'm the campaign chair for Our Mayor, Our Choice, which is a City of Boulder ballot measure that is intended to allow voters to directly elect our mayor using instant runoff ranked choice voting. So we're looking to bring some just more accountability and more inclusion to our local political system and allow voters to elect our mayor, which is kind of crazy because Boulder is the largest city in Colorado that does not elect its own mayor. Which is kind of hard to believe.
A lot of people
but here we are. You're totally right. Yeah. So one of the things we had to do to get on the ballot was go collect a bunch of signatures, thousands of signatures during a pandemic. So that's a whole nother interesting story of how do you pursue direct democracy when it is either against the law, against the rules, and unsafe and unethical to be going around knocking on people's doors, but how do you still go about doing that in safe manners? And so it was a pretty interesting story about that. But nonetheless, most people that came up to sign the petitions all either said, what do you mean we don't elect our mayor? We don't already? And a part of me is like, okay, good. This is just for you. And then the other part of me scared me because I'm like, there's some folks that just don't understand our system because they don't realize that we don't elect our mayor. So voter education was one of the key takeaways from our signature gathering process.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you did that. I'm glad to see it on the ballot, and I imagine it will pass. I hope. I think anyone who takes the time to read it would support it.
I hope so. It seems to be common sense. I mean, you ask a voter, do you want the right to have more democratic accountability? And do you want more rights? Do you want more authority in our governmental system and politics? And I don't know too many people that would say no to that. So we're pretty hopeful that it's just straightforward, and people want that accountability and they want that right. They want stronger democratic principles, especially in the times we live in now. We think it's a good question to ask folks: is when democracy is maybe at its weakest or at its low point, reaching in and leaning in towards stronger democratic principles seems like that's a pretty reasonable thing to ask people.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I guess that is obviously, this ballot measure that I support. I think a lot of people would support it. And then this bigger issue of ranked choice voting. Do you want to kind of walk people through that and what that would mean?
Yeah. So, I think it starts with, what is our current system? And our current system goes by a more official name of first past the post, which.
Oh, really?
Yeah. When you hear that phrase, it certainly doesn't make you think of a voting system, but that's what it's called. And really, I think the better way to describe it is it's a plurality voting system. Means that it's just whoever has the most votes wins, and it's not based on a majority. You could win with very little. In fact, we sort of see that in our politics these days. In fact, you can be elected president without a majority of the voters supporting you. We've seen that twice in the last 20 years. But what ranked choice voting does is it eliminates that plurality and forces a much higher threshold for individuals to be elected. And in a single winner contest, you need to get over 50% of the support and votes to win. And so it really has a lot of, I think, beneficial implications when that's the threshold to win, and not just a vocal minority that's well organized is able to then gain power and then be in a position to dictate to what the majority may otherwise have wanted.
Right. So just to kind of give a simplified example, like in our current system, if we, let's say we had 3 people running for an office, and one of those people could get 40% of the vote, and then the other one can get 30%, and then the other one can get, what does that leave us with?
Leaves us with 30.
Another 30%. Yeah. But those 2 people who got 30%, maybe the vast majority of voters would have loved to see one of those 2 rather than that third person. And yet in our current system, that third person would then win the election. Is that a good example of kind of?
Absolutely. And really what you're touching on is what's called the spoiler effect. And that is especially alive and well when more than 2 candidates, when it's really 3 or more candidates running, and which is, not something, that's a whole nother conversation about, where our third party systems in this country have little to no foothold in a meaningful way in our political system. But where the spoiler effect really comes into play is at the local and state level, where you have a larger preponderance of third party or even people within the same party. And even think about how this would work in primaries, where you have 4, 5, or 6 people of the same party vying for a seat. And the spoiler effect is alive and well. And I'll use city of Boulder as a prime example. And I lived this experience of the spoiler effect. When I ran for city council in 2017, I aligned fairly well politically with a group of candidates, but was not endorsed by that group. And maybe it's worth talking about Boulder's sort of political bifurcation and the polarization that's occurring in our community. But I was not endorsed by the big groups on either side. I had another set of endorsements from newspapers and other stuff. But if you're not endorsed by the big groups, you're really on the outside looking in. And that's what has that's the playbook here in Boulder. But I aligned with one of these groups on most of the issues. And so what that ended up meaning is, I performed well enough to take votes from some of those candidates, not well enough to win, of course. But by taking votes away, it turned out that one of the people who was an incumbent, Jan Burton, she only lost by 800 votes. I accumulated 7,500 votes. And you kind of go, there was easily 800 people that probably, if I weren't running, may have then voted for Jan. And then same is true with another candidate, Mark McIntyre. He lost by a handful of votes. And so you go, man, that's a tough spot because, I ran what I thought was a good campaign, didn't win, which is okay. But to feel that you or one's candidacy would then take away from like-minded people, that's a hard pill to swallow. And then the election result was completely disproportionate. The other group had only about 47% of the total votes, but got 80%, 4 of 5 council seats. So you can tell that, by just having 1 or 2 spoilers on one side, a vocal minority can run away and end up being in power politically. And so it really sort of woke me up to, man, there's got to be a better way where you can empower people to run and not penalize them for just having similar ideas as other candidates, and let people vote their preference. And not have that gross penalty. And that's where ranked choice voting comes in, it allows people to rank their preference. And it's a very common and natural thing to do, right? You go to the ice cream shop and you're like, oh, I want Rocky Road. And then, the ice cream, person working goes, yeah, we're out of Rocky Road. You don't just leave the ice cream shop because they're out of your first choice. You naturally already have a second or third choice in mind. You're like, oh, okay, fine, I'll go with the cookies and cream. So you already you preference things in your everyday life, and so this is really just enabling that natural function to go out.
Well, I just want to look at that one example. I mean, I know that I have people listening from all around the country, even all around the world, but most of the listeners are here in Colorado. But I think it's just worth taking the time to think about and talk about how our election process works, and be more. Think about it more critically. And the example you just gave, you showed up, you got involved, you got engaged, you ran for city council, and then you felt like your running actually helped result in someone you didn't want to winning. And so it's it puts you in this shitty position, but you shouldn't, we should have a system where that's not the outcome of running. And on the national level, we've seen this with in 2000 with Ralph Nader and Gore, the Green Party, and having a third person prominently take away votes, so people aren't able to vote their conscience or what they really want. They have to do this choose between the lesser of 2 evils kind of thing.
Yeah, or protest vote, right? That's the other, people it's a protest vote. And democracy should be about enabling and bringing to fruition people's expression of who they want to lead us politically. It shouldn't be about a lesser of evils or protest or strategic voting to make sure the person that you don't want gets it. It should just be much simpler. Vote for who you want and let that be that. But our political system, and I really treat it like game theory. Game theory has gotten a lot of attention in the last number of years, and at the end of the day, this system, and we locally and nationally, it's all the same general system. Everybody knows the game, and unfortunately, in our country right now, the winning recipe is division and fear, and we owe it to ourselves to either reject that, but that seems impossible because why would you leave the playbook if you know it works, right? I mean, if the playbook gets you wins, why would you change what you're doing? Even if it is divisiveness and fear, because then you're in the game and you're winning. So sometimes you just have to change the game and reset that playbook. And I think that's kind of where we're at. I think that's the frustration, and people are looking for solutions because we keep electing folks and we keep having the same problems persist. A good example is we keep electing new people to Congress, and yet we haven't enacted term limits yet. But it seems like, when you poll people, it's the super majority of Americans want term limits, and yet it just can't get done. Well, there's a lot of stuff involved in that.
There are so many examples like the one you just gave, where if you ask the majority of people in this country a given question, the majority or even an overwhelming majority would answer in the similar way. And yet we don't see that happening on the national level. And so I really think what you're speaking to, ranked choice voting, we'll get more into the details of what that means. That's a step in the right answer. But another example would be the Citizens United, some of these Supreme Court cases, Citizens United, should we have unlimited, unregulated money being able to give into any candidate, like I think the majority of people would say no. And yet we never, it feels more and more like our system doesn't respond to what most people would want. And that leads to people feeling like it's pointless or giving into these like conspiracy theories that we're hearing more and more about. And I think, I mean, that's a whole nother subject, but I think part of the reason why there's this epic rise in conspiracy thinking is people feel powerless. People feel like they're being taken advantage of. There's like a kernel of truth in a lot of these theories, like behind them, that is people in a sense are powerless. Like we're given choices that we don't want to have. A lot of people look at the ballot and they see two names and they have to choose them. They don't like either one. So.
Yeah, no, I think, you know, the challenge is, we're not going to fix this. This isn't fixed all night, right? I mean, we've had a couple hundred years of the system we have entrenching itself in all of what we do politically. So it just takes, I liken it to the analogy of, you know, the Titanic, you know, big ship, small rudder, and to miss the iceberg, you have to start turning early, and it's not going to seem like you're making much of a difference until way down the road. And so I think that's what we have to start doing is make the small little bites, and that's hard to do because people are craving results, and we live in a society of instant gratification, and so if it can't be a solution that fixes it now, it's not worth taking the incremental steps, and that's just, I think, a philosophical difference. But it is one for us to take note of, and taking the small steps will pay off in the long run if we all agree that the long outcome and goals are something we want to be committed to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think the turning the Titanic is a good metaphor. So with the ranked choice voting system, like, and you can help me out here, but it's like you would be able to rank your choices from like 1 to 3 or 1 to 4. Is that?
Yeah, so the ranking number is rather arbitrary in terms of how many you get to rank. That's a decision for every city or county clerk to determine based on the number of candidates and their voting software and their rules for how ballots are made. But you know, generally speaking, when you look at ranked choice voting across the country, it's anywhere between 5 and 7 or 8 candidates is the number of candidates that you get to rank up to. And you know, that's a really healthy number, and elections haven't really demanded you needing rounds after that. Most ranked choice voting elections end after the, you know, second or third round of voting, and it's worth keeping in mind. You know, ranked choice voting, in terms of its, you know, instant runoff form, which is like, you know, a single winner seat like mayor or congressman or senate or president, not for like a city council, which is a different beast. It's a regular election until, you know, when you count the first round of votes, if a winner comes out right off the bat and has 50%, the election's over. So then there's nothing fancy about it. It's just you count everyone's first place votes, and if someone already has 50%, it's over. A winner announced, move on. It's only if in that first round of voting, the winner, the leading candidate does not get 50%. That's when you then implement the system of ranked choice voting to look at the second place votes of the individual or candidate who was currently in last place. And then you redistribute those votes accordingly and keep rinse and repeating that process until a candidate crosses 50%, and then you declare a winner.
Right. And what that enables people to do is vote with their number one choice, the person they really want to win and believe in, even if they know that person's likely to lose. And then with their second or third or fourth choice, they can get to the candidate that's more likely to win. So more people feel like they had a part in making that choice. You can vote your conscience more. And it takes away this, like, I guess this winner-take-all system is still there, but it would be more fair choice. And part of what you're speaking to is it could make the whole election process less divided and nasty. Maybe
100%.
People being nice to each other and actually having real conversations and actually trying to convince people of the value of their ideas and plans would come back into our political system. I mean, the last 100%. Debate, my mind, you know, it's hard for my mind not to go to the presidential race because that's what takes up so much of our attention. But like the last debate was such a disaster, and I watched the whole thing and I came out of it not knowing anything anymore, like what these people would actually do in the next 4 years. There's nothing of substance that was communicated.
I think what everyone took away was, where's the mute button, right? So, yeah. So I mean, yeah, you're right. I mean, I would maybe separate the presidential election out a little bit, just because that at that level, there's really no viability of third-party candidates right now from which to really leverage the benefits of ranked choice voting, I would argue.
Well, right. I think that's true in our moment in history. But if we had the ranked choice system in place for a while, and say there was a third party or an independent person who didn't even have a political party, and he had 20% of the electorate like really liked his ideas or her ideas, that would be enough for them to get on the debate stage, for them to be on the ballot.
Yep.
And if those people knew that their vote wouldn't be wasted, that would enable that process to happen. So we could have a much more diverse, actual debate instead of this system of polarization that we're stuck in.
You're 100% right, Julian. Yeah, I think over time, this would gradually empower third parties to have a greater stake, a greater share, and greater voice in our political system. But that would take some time, and whether it's 1 or 2 or 3 election cycles. But yes, ultimately, they would gain more prowess. If I think they have to get over 10%. So there's some number, I don't know exactly. Someone will correct us, I'm sure. But they can't even get to the debate stage at this point, right? So, but it's because, and it's sort of that catch-22. They can't get to the debate stage because people realize that for the most part, if you vote for them, you're wasting your vote. So then they're not going to put in their support, even though they might really support those ideas. But ranked choice voting throws that calculus out of the water, and people go, yeah, here, you're my first preference, and you know what? Hey, Joe Biden's going to be my second. And then therefore they then are empowered with that initial support to then be a part of the debate stage. So yeah, I agree. In time that'll grow. But where it has instant effect, though, is again in those state and local races where right off the bat they're either nonpartisan, or it's more frequent to have more than 3 candidates running for those, where it has an instant impact. And you see that in communities like San Francisco and across the country that use ranked choice voting, is you see the positive gain. And to your point, it limits divisiveness. And it does so because, again, if you don't already have 50% of the electorate supporting you, by definition, you have to go seek out second place votes from your opposition. And that means reaching across. That means having policies that are a bit more moderate. You can't just slam policies into your echo chamber of your vocal minority, because there will not be enough second and third place votes to get you over the threshold. So it forces people to moderate their positions and forces candidates to be more cordial, to not run negative ads. Some research has shown running negative ads is a death kiss for candidates in a ranked choice voting environment. Voters are heavily turned off for it, especially if they're looking, if you are, negative campaigning works fine for your own base. I mean, look at our current president, right? I mean, he can get away with negative everything and it doesn't affect his base. But if for him to get elected, he had to reach out to people who were a little bit more skeptical, then negative campaigning would be over with in order for him to reach those folks. So the calculus changes and the game theory changes. And I think that's what's important. It's not that anybody knows the script of winning. It's that everybody gets to kind of start from a clean slate of a new system and learn it and figure out how to run a good quality campaign that means reaching out to a broader coalition of people to get elected. And all of those are positive attributes of a political system that I think is becoming of a democracy like this country, and one that we would probably want to aspire towards.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this, like the question of incentives, what are the incentives, is a big one to keep in mind. But it's just so sad that we can't have more nuanced, intelligent conversation and debate in the year 2020. It seems like we're devolving. And so there's a lot of reasons for that. A lot of people are talking about that stuff, but it makes so much sense. If you had this ranked choice voting system, everyone's vote really mattered and would go then to the candidate that was closer to you, maybe not your number one choice like we're talking about, but maybe your number two, number third. If you had 5 candidates like that on a stage and they're debating, the person that's going to do the best is going to be the one that reaches the most of those people, rather than this, you're using the term vocal minority. It really does feel like the Republican Party has been so successful at this game, and they've had so many successes across the country, and yet do they represent the majority of the people? It doesn't seem like it.
No, and I mean, well, no, is a simple answer. But whether they represent a majority or not, I think is, well, we'll see. But what does remain is that we have an entire populace of our country, and then of states and local communities who just don't choose not to participate. They just don't vote. And so in many ways, we really don't know what a majority of this country wants. We just know what a majority of the minority wants, to be honest.
Right.
And if we had 200 if we had 200 million people voting, then one could maybe argue that that's the voice of the true majority, but we don't. And so that's a challenge. And so what you think about in something like ranked choice voting is those marginalized groups, marginalized communities, disenfranchised voters, and why they're disenfranchised. Why are they choosing not to participate? And maybe in some cases not choosing at all. I mean, the system prohibits them in some form or fashion from participating in our elections. And there's either direct or indirect voter suppression going on. But regardless of the reason, think about what might entice them in terms of an incentive to participate. If you're someone that is, I'll take Boulder for example. If you're not white and wealthy or affluent, you're on the outside looking in a lot of the issues in our community, and so you have to ask yourself, like, what brings those folks in? And in many ways, you have to think about sort of an empathetic approach. What matters to them? What is their world? What are the things that affect them, and are there candidates that represent that? And the way we have it right now in Boulder, that's not, we don't really have candidates that reach that group because of the way our political system has been sort of designed for decades. Yeah. But imagine a system where they get to go, hey, I know I'm in the small minority here, but I do have needs and I do have things that I feel are valuable in our community. Here's a candidate that I want to support. They may not have a chance, but I want to express that support. That gets them into the political process. Otherwise, they're saying, why waste my time with a lesser of evils? Why waste my time if my vote's not going to count? I'm going to elect some folks who don't really care about my community anyway, so why participate? But this gives them a chance to not just participate and vote, but it starts to turn the Titanic, as I said a little bit ago, because now that's a group, that's a voting block that some of those other candidates now need to be able to reach out to, and to reach out in terms of their policies to show that they hear them, because they want those second and third place votes. Otherwise, you can, in our current system, you can ignore them, because the current system means you can win with 30% of your support, 40%. You don't have to include these groups of people in our political process to win. But with something like ranked choice voting, they all of a sudden matter, and matter significantly, and become part of that broader coalition that one needs in order to succeed. And that just changes the landscape. And I think that's a valuable thing for us not to forget, is how does it affect those of us that currently participate? Yeah, sure, there's that. It's those that don't, and how does this bring them in? Because to me, that's probably more important than how it changes those of us that regularly participate in our election process.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point. And like, it's the kind of thing we should be trying to do, right? To get more people involved, more people represented in different ways, like for their votes to count. Because like when you talk about that group of people that feel that way, it's probably more like groups. There's probably lots of little groups of people. There's all kinds of different populations that aren't, they look at the ballot and they think there's no point. And a lot of times they might be right, like what you're speaking to. So.
Well, I mean, look, it's the melting pot. Our country is an incredible melting pot, and it's, I mean, it's kind of ridiculous to think that you slice up America and it's represented by two parties. I mean, if you really wanted to slice up this country in terms of ideas and policies, it would probably be made of a dozen or more political parties of reasonable substance. And you go, well, that's an exchange of ideas. Like, that's where real stuff happens. It's not split between two. And so there's a great opportunity for us to consider that, but it's going to be incremental, right? People don't like change. People in power, especially, one, don't like change, but two, don't want to change the system that got them into power to begin with. So, in many ways, they're the gatekeepers to this. So it is kind of a catch-22. But slowly but surely, we're chipping away. So, I hope our ballot measure is part of that next of a set of dominoes that helps really push this at a larger level.
Well, I'm glad you said that. This catch-22 of the people in power don't want to change the system that got them there. And I guess, like, how do you see, like, on a national level, like, if we look at something like the Electoral College, it's like incredibly unpopular. It's another example of one of those things where if there was just a measure on the ballot, do we want the Electoral College or not? I'm sure the vast majority of people would vote no, and yet we're stuck with it forever. Like, is this ranked choice voting here in Colorado part of a national effort that could eventually make some of these changes possible?
Sure. I mean, the Electoral College is a complicated matter for sure. And there's a lot of sides to this coin. And, in Colorado, we have Proposition 113, which is a national popular vote, which would be an affirmation to what our Colorado legislature passed. That would join a pact of states that would assign their electors for the Electoral College based on who wins the national popular vote. And if enough states sign on to this, it effectively nullifies the Electoral College without changing the Constitution. Right. And that's that's the purpose behind it. But I just sort of maybe caution a little bit about just the simple idea of abolishing the Electoral College, because there are some positives that come from it. But, it's two sides to every story, right? I mean, the fact that, my only caution, my concern, I should say, not caution, is it just becomes a race of the coasts for president. And, there is something to be said that you've got presidential candidates flocking to states like Iowa. and it really, I mean, middle of the country, small, rural, low population density. And that's kind of important, because that was the whole purpose of the framers of our Constitution, was to not make it a density game and a population game, and make sure that rural parts of our country are still heard. So I get both sides. Right. And so it's a matter of how do we go about it in a way that doesn't just carve a donut in our country and ignore the voice of a big swath of our country. But it does remain to be seen. I mean, right. I mean, it's important that we are a democracy, and yet we've had two presidents in 20 years that are not representative of a majority of our country, but literally goes out and is our representative of the country. And so it seems like that in itself is kind of is hypocritical.
We need to find a balance. I mean, when I think about Hillary Clinton getting more votes than like 6 times the population of, Wyoming, and yet Wyoming gets the kind of, some of these states get to kind of decide the election. Anyway, you're right. That's a whole other thing. But
yeah.
How did you get so interested in all of this? Like, how did you get so interested in politics and in the ranked choice voting?
Sort of, I think, a circuitous path. I've always been a political junkie, the kind of guy that just always reads the news, reads the politics, likes to get into the debate of stuff. My background's in astronomy and astrophysics. I studied at University of Colorado, then worked at the university running the planetarium on campus, and worked for a bunch of faculty members on various NASA missions. And, for me, I was in pursuit of just sort of this objective truth of life. I think that's why my desire to learn the, secrets of the universe was so much of my passion and drive.
Yeah, you've got that picture behind you that you said you took yourself, right?
Yeah, this is actually a picture. It's hard to really see completely if I sort of swing aside. But right on my shoulder, right here, is the elephant's trunk. It's a nebula. It's quite a fun one to photograph. But yeah, that was taken here in Boulder. I've got a desk, a deck telescope, and so it's kind of it's been my COVID mental health work for sure. Late at night, go sit on the deck, have a drink, and stare at the stars and take pictures of the cosmos and sort of let my mind drift. Has been wonderful therapy in these crazy times. But in terms of how it really got going, I enjoyed all of my time in academia, and what really sort of transpired was a family tragedy. My dad and brother were killed in a plane crash in 2013.
Oh man!
And that just, and I think anybody who goes through that type of event, you are brought to your basic foundation, and you come out of it thinking like, well, what do I want to do in this world that has meaning? My dad was 63, had made immense contributions to his communities and was well respected, owned a business, and was just, he made impact. My brother, on the other hand, was getting his life started and never really had a chance to impact his community because he was just getting his career started. And so for me, I realized you just don't know how long you have. You can either be 28 like my brother or 63 like my dad, or anywhere in between. And it was like, no, I don't want to fall into the older trope of, well, when I'm retired is when I'll get into politics and do all that. No, it was like, no, the time was now, and there were urgencies, right? Climate change, the political dysfunction was already running rampant, and for me, it was like, how can I be that best example for other folks, but more importantly for my kids, but be the change that you want to be in this world. And so I was like, it starts at the local level. So I just I left the university, and I just said, I need to just dive headfirst and go all in on making the community a better place than I found it. And that's just a principle I hold true. It's how I think about when I go backpacking. Or out in the wilderness. How do you leave that spot better than you found it? And I treat my community the same way. I treat our environment the same way. And so that's just a virtue I have, and I hope to stay consistent with that. And that's why I dove right into it. And as I sort of told you a little bit earlier, I ran for council and was a part of that election process that just didn't set right. It took me 3 days to get over losing personally. Losing is not the issue. It was the sting of how my running a campaign actually led to a worse result for our community.
Right.
And you kind of go, you don't run to make things worse. You try to run to make things better. And it was like, I made things worse by running and losing, but stealing votes from other people. And I just was like, wait, this can't be the system we have here. So that was what just said, all right, let's go all forth. And seeing that most obvious solutions were about our election system, studied a number of them. Ranked choice voting rose to the top very quickly for a lot of reasons. Most notably, it's most widely used. And two, there's just a lot of good research behind it. There's other good voting methods out there. They just haven't had enough, I would say, time in the sun to be vetted, to have good data and research and really understand how electorates and how political scientists evaluate it. But ranked choice voting was there, and I was just like, you know what? And again, in my scientific background, I really was like, how can I methodically sort of go through the analysis of this? And that's where we landed. And so for the last couple of years, I've been really trying to bring election reform to our community and work with any and all groups and people that share the same understanding of we can do better. It's not that it's fully broken, but it can be better. And it is, but yeah.
I just appreciate your loss there with your family members, and then it made you reflect on what's really important and wanting to do it now. And that led you to get more involved in politics in a good way with like good motivation. And you mentioned like climate change and the environment, and that's something so many people in Boulder care so much about. So it makes a lot of sense that at a local level, we do our part there. But then this all that good intention and good energy and wanting to make a positive difference, and then getting involved in local politics, and then this situation of your run for city council ended up supporting having the opposite effect of what you wanted. And so then you turn around and you say, well, this system is fucked. Like, let's fix the system. Let's make a better system of how we vote and elect. Because in a better functioning system, we'd have more people like you getting excited, getting engaged, have more people running, have more people wanting to be involved without it like ending up doing the opposite of what they want. So yeah, it's a good story of how dysfunctional things have become and this is like a way to try to make them a little bit better. And the ranked choice voting makes so much sense intuitively. I think it's pretty easy to explain. I think most people get it when you think about it for a minute. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that you can't really, it's hard to explain the process of ranked choice voting in 30 seconds. But when you look at all the exit polls and surveys of of groups and cities that do ranked choice votings, the voters are like, yeah, it's a piece of cake. Like, I get it. I mean, and once you do it, you're like, oh, that makes total sense. But it's one of those things like you have to do it for it to make sense. It doesn't do well with words. I'll be the first one to admit. Ranked choice voting does not sound easy. It is easy in practice, in doing, but it's one of those things in words. It just doesn't. It just comes off a little clunky. And I think that's why there's always this apprehension. Yeah. It does. It does take time, but it doesn't. It's just not as simple in a 30-second bit to explain it. But for me, I enjoy that challenge mostly because it's like, I used to teach, people about black holes. And you can't do that in 30 seconds. So you do have to take the time and build the foundation of some other concepts to get there. But ranked choice voting, once you do it, it's easy and it's empowering. And when you realize, like, wow, my vote isn't wasted. Like, I voted for someone, they lost, and now I still my ballot is still alive. Where so many people, as soon as the person they lose, they're done and their vote's gone, their ballot's tossed. And so it's awfully empowering. And I think hopefully more people understand that. And I hope it's about those marginalized people who are not already participating. I really hope this and some other things we can do can bring them into the fold, because at the end of the day, we need their voice. To be honest, those of us that have been expressing our voice for however long, that's not working. We need new voices into our political system to help move us in the right direction. And how do we get them to come out of the shadows and out of not participating into our electoral process?
Yeah. Well, and I like how it's not a partisan issue. I mean, I'm sure in our given political climate, it would be made into that if enough people start talking about it, but it's just a different election system that's going to be more fair, more democratic. A conservative person could win using it, a liberal person could win using it, a libertarian could win, so it's really opening up the field even more. I guess I'm trying to imagine, like, I explained this to a couple friends the other day, and they had some questions like, if everyone fills out their ballot and ranks 1 through, say, 4, and your number one choice loses that first round, does everyone then go to number 2, or like the people who voted number 1 and their person got enough votes, like they make it to the second round or something? Do you want to explain how the votes would get kind of sorted out a little bit?
Right. So take your first round accounting. You rank 4 candidates. First round accounting. You go through. There's someone who's leading in second and third, and then there's the 4th place candidate. So after the first round accounting, you count only first votes. Whoever is in last place after counting every ballot's first votes, that last place candidate is eliminated, and the ballots that voted for that last place person are the ones that get redistributed. Everybody else's ballots for candidates that are still in the race are still attached to that candidate. It's only the eliminated candidates' ballots that then get rescanned and have their second choice redistributed among the remaining candidates that are still alive. So it's your second choice is only counted when your first choice is eliminated. And so if your first choice is still in the game, is still in and is in first or second and hasn't been eliminated, your second choice has not been applied to anything at this point. It's still about your first choice. And so there's countless elections where your second choice, if you voted for a person who's hanging out in first place or ends up being the winner, your second choice, third and fourth are never even touched, counted, or cared about.
Right.
It's only when your first place vote getter candidate gets eliminated, do we then look at the second place. And so then you go redistribute. And if no one gets across 50%, you then, after the second round, go, okay, who's in last place after the second round? And then you eliminate that candidate and take all the ballots from that candidate. Now, that candidate's ballots, and I say that candidate's ballots, I mean the people that voted for that candidate, right? You can just think of a stack of ballots with a person's name on it, right? In a room, right? This is the way. So I say that candidate's ballots. Now that's going to be a mix. Some of the people that voted for that second round candidate who got eliminated voted for that person with their first round pick, and some of them, that was their second pick because their first pick got eliminated. Mm-hmm. And so of the people that now, sadly, lost their first place and now have lost their second place vote, it goes to their third place vote to get redistributed. But those other people that voted for that person, number one, it's now only their second place preference that gets redistributed. So that's where, when you discuss, it gets a little confusing, right? People are like, wait, so whose preference? But it's actually really simple, and computers handle this really easy. It's just only worry about when you get eliminated, whatever ballots were associated with that candidate, you just go to the next person down the line on their preference and then redistribute and then see if someone's crossed 50%. And when they do, then the counting's over. Mm-hmm. So in practice, it's really simple, and it makes a lot of sense. It's just when you are hand waving and doing this and you're talking to someone, it's easy to kind of get lost or get confused. So that's why the wordsmithing of it's not sexy when you talk about it, but on paper and in practicality, when you use it, it works. And, exit polls are like 85, 90% of people are like, yeah, there's a piece of cake. We love it. And so you go, okay, so clearly it's working. And that's why it continues to spread around the country as fast as it does.
That's awesome. Yeah, that was a good explanation. So it's already in use in a lot of local elections, and it's used in Europe, right, on a bigger scale.
Yep. Is that correct? And in Australia. It's used in San Francisco and Oakland. It's used in Minneapolis. It's in a test phase in Utah. So to your point about Republicans, I mean, there's quite a number of Republicans who see this viably as well. And in many ways, they see it viably as well because they get it like we do, right? They even in places like Utah, where you might have a tendency to have more conservative candidates for city council or whatever, you still have the issue of spoiler. You still have the issue of people strategically voting, not wanting to vote for lesser evils. So regardless if you put an R or a D around people, the perils of our current system exist regardless of Democrat or Republican. And this is just still a viable solution to fixing some of those issues. Those are not liberal or conservative issues. They're American political system issues. And that's why I think it's very nonpartisan when you boil down to it. And strip away this extemporaneous or people not wanting to change because they're currently in power. Once you strip the biases away, it's very straightforward.
Nice. Yeah, makes so much sense. And I mean, there's so many people that I've talked to that they don't fit into the Republican or Democratic box, and they don't want to. And there's a lot of people who feel that they're put in that box. Like, I mean, it's a whole other subject, but things like race and identity, it's like intersects with this two-party system, I think, in ways that are really toxic, and we're polarized and we're fighting each other. And so, yeah, I'm excited about this idea, and it's one small step at the local level, but hopefully it'll spread more and more. Like you're saying, there's a lot of places already doing it. It makes so much sense. I hope that the future, like, we just get outside of this whole two-party system. Like, I think that it's time for a change. Like, that's not serving us anymore.
Well, it's certainly not headed in the right direction. So yeah, right. I mean, it begs the difference. I mean, are we going to expect these two parties to change? Again, they know what wins. So why would they change the game if they know that their game plan will win? We have to change it from within. And I, one of the phrases I like to sort of say is, change percolates up. It doesn't trickle down. And what I mean by that is the change that we want to see at those higher levels, it starts here at local levels. It starts at cities, counties, and states. If enough cities and states enact these changes, it's an inevitability that it will then percolate upwards and be the change we see at the national level. That change doesn't get disseminated downward, and it never does, right? Because those in power don't want to ever see the change. So we have to put it on ourselves. And you and I talked with, when we were setting before we, started this podcast was, what do we expect from our government? Is it reactionary or is it proactive? Like, do we want them to always react to a crisis, or do we want them to proactively, do things that limit or prevent the crisis from happening to begin with? Right. And so that's a philosophical question, but it's also a pragmatic one. When you start to think about what's the role of government, and I don't think we've ever seen a functioning government that's proactive. I mean, can you imagine a proactive government? So I think there's a lot of things that we have simple things that we can demand, but it starts with the majority of whatever voting bloc and voting populace expressing themselves and having then the government represent a true majority of that group. Then you can change the system. But until then, it's, you're ice skating uphill. And so we just wonder why we're not getting anywhere.
Yeah. It's a good point. I think there's a lot of power in, how do I put this in the words? Like ethics, like being on the right side of a question, being on the right side of history, so to speak. If enough people start talking about this and having this conversation, it's clear that something like ranked choice voting increases our representation. It makes it more democratic. It makes it better. It's just better. If you look at our current system versus ranked choice voting, and you make a pro and con list, it's clear which one is better. So if enough people on the local level start doing it, and then they're asking their senators, they're asking their congressmen, or maybe it'll even make it to the presidential debate stage. It's like, do you support this or not? It's going to be hard for someone to really defend the current system against this one, if they're honest. And it's not a partisan thing. It's not about conservative or liberal. It's about fairness. It's about having more people's vote count. It's about, it's about these things. And another benefit of it that I just thought of too is, like, if we have this system, you don't have to have a runoff election. And it kind of, there's not going to be so many, it would be very rare for there to be like a 49 versus 50% kind of thing. It would be a much more clear, satisfying outcome in general.
Certainly, yeah. And you add more candidates, the chances of you getting even close to a tie are statistically, irrelevant, more or less. But yeah, no, it saves money. You don't have to deal with instant runoff. You don't have to deal with voter fatigue that come with runoff elections. But like I said, it also saves money because you don't have to run that election again. And so there's a lot of those benefits. And you bring up right. It just makes sense. It really does. And I think you get past any sort of stigma of what a new voting system is and can be, and you just present people with it working and show them. And like I said, we've done these test elections where it's like, hey, rank your favorite hiking trail in Boulder in order of preference. And people like that. They're like, I want to know what the majority of these people think. We do it with cookies or candy. And people will, like, once they do it, it's amazing. Once you get them to do it, even if it's digitally, like we have a little digital app that we use to get people to sort of play around with ranked choice voting, where they get to, in graph form, see how the results shift from round to round and how a winner is declared. Yeah. And then once you do it, they're like, yeah, that makes total sense. Like,
that's a good example.
Yeah. I mean, I could spend a half hour explaining it to you, but if you just do a 10-minute election, it'll make more sense to you just by doing it than me trying to explain it. So, and maybe that's a critique that I'm not as great of an explainer or teacher as I might be. I think I am, but either way, the doing is what it is.
Yeah, and it's a good example with the candy. Like, if you just wanted to know a group of people what the most popular kind of candy was, or if you were a company with a bunch of different products and you want to figure out what people like the most, it's not about a system where they vote for their number one and they divide up into two parties and fight each other. It would be like, you actually want to know what they actually like the most. You would do something like this. Like, it just, it makes more sense.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I say, I think it more and more places are adopting, and at least here in Colorado, there's Already some legislation that's being worked through the state legislature, and it's being worked on by some folks. And from what I hear, by sometime next year, there could be a vote on it at the state level. And maybe, by the end of the year, it's off to Governor Polis's desk to signing it. So there's already some enabling legislation which would make it even easier for communities throughout the state of Colorado to use and adopt new voting methods. And, yes. And so even our state legislature, they're hearing, they're listening. But again, it's always the Titanic. It's slow. It changes not fast. And so as long as you keep your eye on the prize, you don't get jaded on the slow process. And just as long as you're making incremental change in the right direction, then you stay with it. And I think, at least here in the state of Colorado, we're headed in the right direction right now.
Yeah, it's a good message. And you don't want to change things like this too quickly. But I do believe that collectively we're at a point where some real changes are wanted and needed over the next few years. And I think the election of Trump has shown that. I think coronavirus has shown that. So I would like to look at all this, challenges we've been through and have a positive outlook that we're going to make some changes and move in a good way. And I think this will be a part of it. If enough people get this on the state level and have the conversation, it's only a matter of time until it's a national conversation.
Oh, 100%. And to be honest, I don't think we're that far from that. When you've got states like Utah exploring this, and you got Massachusetts, you got Maine, you got New York, and you got California that's starting to do this, and Colorado is going to be not far behind. The dominoes are falling, and slowly but surely, I think more and more will head that direction. If I were to rub the magic 8-ball, I would say in 10 years time, we're going to be having serious national dialogue about formally changing our electoral process in a meaningful manner. These things gain momentum, and they are momentum changing. And so I think that's we're near an inflection point where we're going to start heading where things are going to change pretty quickly. Yeah. Certainly with continued dissatisfaction with our current system, the more pitfalls, the more times our country falls flat on its face, lack of better words. We claim to be this bastion of democracy, and yet we seem to just not get it right. We just are stumbling on it right now. And at some point, we're going to get to a place where we hit ourselves enough. We're going to go, okay, we got to find a new way to do this. We're smart enough. We'll turn the corner.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we will. I think 4 years, 6 years, I don't know how long, but I think things are going to change. And I think when I think about our whole political system, I think the unlimited money is so disgusting. It's been such a disaster. And with the growth of technology and social media, for all its ills, we have things like this podcast where anyone can share new ideas, can share new perspectives. There's massive communities that are totally outside the Democrat, Republican kind of binary camps. And I think those are going to have more and more big impacts on our whole country. And I think there's a lot of positives too. And I think some of these conversations will slowly percolate out into the so-called mainstream.
And they are a little bit, right? And again, to some extent, and I go back to sort of reactionary. In the time of COVID and everything else that's going on, everybody's just with what's right in front of their nose. That is where we're at. And something like changing our election systems a little bit more, seeing the forest for the trees. It's a little bit more long-term planning. And right now our country, and I hate to speak in gross generalizations, but we're in crisis management mode in literal and figurative manner. And I don't, until we can get out of that, I don't know if it's palpable to really be discussing in a meaningful way, changing and really shaking the system up. Because in many ways, the system as is really the only thing holding us together. As faulted as it is, it's real, right? It's the tenuous remnants of what we've got left. So I think we have to let things settle down in a lot of facets, be it COVID and just our institutions as a whole. And and then we can maybe start to get there. But it is hard to shake the boat.
That's a good point.
In our current times.
We just need to start talking with each other more, not be so divided and polarized, and not reconnect with the humanity and like everyone wants to improve their life, and most people want to do the right thing and make the world better. And we need to like reconnect with our common values around this. And I really hope that will happen more and more. Like I think you're absolutely right. Like we're in crisis. Like coronavirus has been really tough. And then out of that crisis, something better could emerge. Something, more connection could happen.
I hope so.
That's my hope.
I can tell you personally, I'm craving human to human interaction. I mean, as much as it's nice to interact with you, Julian, over this, there's something still sterile about this environment. And I just hope that out of maybe COVID, that craving for human interaction is not just get back to where we were, but is done so in a new way, a way of empathy. Right? Yeah. How have you, like the curiosity of how has others dealt with this? How have others made it through these times? And I think, if we start from a place of empathy, we're going to just be better no matter what. But what happens in this hyperpolarization is it's all about me, what's going with my silo, and then everything else is just ignored. And I hope as this sort of as we pop out of this COVID bubble, hopefully in the next 6 months, a year, however long it takes, we re-enter that society that we've been craving with a new lens and a new filter and a new lease on what it's like to connect with others. That's my hope. I know I will sort of leave the COVID bubble with those intentions. I just hope others do as well.
Yeah, I think having lost a lot of our ability to connect face to face and in person, like it's made me so much more appreciative of those times. And so I think you're absolutely right. Like when the bubble of coronavirus has finally popped, will be there'll be a new appreciation for being able to gather together, for being able to see music together or talk in person or meet in person and even hug someone. Like, wow, how amazing would that be? So,
right. There's these primordial instincts, right? A year ago, did any of us realize how much we subconsciously crave touch and contact? It's right. Because when it's there all day, for me, I get to hug my wife and hug my kids, and so you get that, you shake a hand, you shake and hug a close friend. You get that contact, and so it's being met all the time, and so you kind of don't pay attention to some of these primordial subconscious necessities. And it's amazing, like just being able to hug or shake someone's hand or tap someone on the shoulder. They're just so expressive, and we don't get that. And so it's amazing how much of that stuff is so deep that you just didn't know was deeply seated. You thought you just took it for granted as everyday life. I know I did. Right. But it's amazing what that has taught us.
Yeah. Yep. Big learning for all of us.
Yeah, indeed.
Well, it's been great having you on the podcast.
Thank you, Julian. I really appreciate it. This has been a really fun conversation. It's been fun to sort of share some ideas and thoughts and maybe more importantly, aspirations of what we see and hopes for down the road.
Thank you so much for listening. If you have found this podcast valuable, there are many ways in which you can support it. You can share it with friends and on your social media. You can leave us a review on your favorite podcast listening app. And you can visit our Patreon page, patreon.com/astateofmind. For show notes and more information unique to each episode, visit astateofmindplay.com. And to learn more about my work as a therapist, meditation teacher, and coach, visit julianocean.us. And please don't hesitate to send me a message or email and let me know what you think and contribute to our conversation. Thank you so much for your support. It is listeners like you that make all this so very much worthwhile.